The rain fell in sheets against the palace windows, each drop a tiny hammer beating against the glass. I stood in the corridor, my hands trembling at my sides, watching the shadow of the Empress Dowager's sedan chair drift past the garden like a specter. It was the same rain, the same corridor, the same sickly sweet scent of plum blossoms drifting from the courtyard below. And yet everything had changed. I was alive. No, that wasn't quite right. I was again. The damp stone beneath my bare feet, the rough wool of my maid's uniform scratching against my skin, the distant murmur of servants going about their evening duties. All of it was achingly familiar. I had walked this path before. I had stood in this very spot, frozen with terror, and watched the Empress Dowager's procession glide past, while I clutched the forged letter that would seal my fate. That was 300 years ago. Or perhaps it was only yesterday. Time had become a strange, twisted thing since I had drawn my last breath on the executioner's block, my head separated from my body while the crowds cheered for my blood. I had been 22 years old when I died, 19 when I was sold into the palace as a servant, 18 when I first met Chen Yun, the man who would promise me the stars and then feed me to the wolves piece by piece. But now my heart beat again in my chest. Now I drew breath, and my hands were smooth and unmarked by the scars that had covered them in my final days. Now I stood in the corridor of the Winter Palace, watching the procession of the Empress Dowager, and I remembered everything. The letter crumpled in my pocket. I could feel its edges pressing against my thigh, the same letter I had once believed was proof of the Crown Prince's treason. I had delivered it to the Empress Dowager without hesitation, so certain was I in Chen Yun's love. "Do this for me, Wei-er," he had said, cupping my face in his warm hands. "Do this, and we will be together forever. I will marry you. I will make you my wife." Fool, I thought now. Foolish, foolish girl. I pulled the letter from my pocket and held it up to the torchlight. The characters blurred before my eyes, not from tears. I had shed enough of those in my past life to fill a river, but from rage so pure and cold it burned like ice in my veins. I had been 19 years old, desperate and in love, and I had believed every lie that fell from Chen Yun's lips. I had believed that a man of his station, noble-born, favored by the emperor, destined for greatness, could truly love a lowly palace maid like me. He had used me. He had given me the letter and smiled at me with such tenderness that I had practically floated out of his chambers. He had watched me walk to the Empress Dowager's quarters, and he had known that I would not come back. In my past life, I had been executed for treason. The forged letter, written in my own hand, I was a fool. I had copied it myself, believing Chen Yun when he said it was necessary to conceal the real conspirators, had condemned the Crown Prince to house arrest and me to the headsman's blade. I had gone to my death screaming Chen Yun's name, begging them to let me explain, to let me see him one more time. He had not come. Of course he had not come. He had been in the emperor's chambers that morning, receiving accolades for his loyalty in uncovering the conspiracy. I had died believing that he loved me, but had been unable to save me. I had died still in love with him. What a stupid, stupid way to die. I tore the letter in half. Then I tore it again and again, until the fragments drifted from my fingers like falling snow, settling on the rain-wet stones. Some of the ink blurred and ran, spreading into dark, illegible smears. Good. Let it be destroyed. Let no one ever find it. The Empress Dowager's procession had passed. I was safe. For now, I pressed my back against the cold stone of the corridor wall and tried to slow my racing heart. My head swam with memories, not just the ones from before my death, but the new ones too. The moment of waking up in my small servant's quarters, gasping and clawing at the thin blanket, as if I could still feel the blade at my throat. The sound of my own voice, younger and less worn, crying out in the dark, the arrival of the senior maids, scolding me for waking the others with my nightmares. They had thought I was simply frightened. They had no idea that the girl they were comforting had already lived, already loved, already died. I had lain in that narrow bed for an hour, trembling, trying to piece together what had happened to me. Had I dreamed it all? Had my fevered imagination conjured a life that had never been? But the memories were too sharp, too detailed, too achingly real. I remembered the taste of the executioner's wine. I remembered the feel of my own hair as it was bound back from my neck. I remembered the cold, clean shock of the blade, and then nothing. And now I was here again, 19 years old, serving in the Winter Palace, and Chen Yun had not yet approached me. The letter that had destroyed my past life, was not due to be delivered for another 3 months. 3 months to change everything. I had no intention of changing anything. I had every intention of destroying it all. Lin Wei? Is that you? I straightened quickly, brushing the remnants of paper from my uniform. The voice was familiar, sweet and high-pitched, like a songbird with a cruel streak. I turned to face the speaker, and for a moment I could not breathe. Liu Lian, my former best friend, my sister in all but blood, the girl who had betrayed me to Chen Yun in exchange for a promise of marriage that he never fulfilled. I had loved her like family. I had shared my food with her, my secrets, my hopes, and she had smiled at me while slipping a knife between my ribs. Liu Lian, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had expected. You startled me. She was younger in this life, too. Her round face was untouched by the lines of worry that had creased her brow in my final days. Her eyes were bright and guileless, or so they appeared. I knew better now. I knew the serpent that coiled beneath her sweet smile. Are you all right? She asked, bustling forward with her hands outstretched. I heard you crying out earlier. The senior maid said you were having nightmares. Poor thing, you must be exhausted. The new servants always struggle so much. I let her take my hands, let her squeeze them gently, let her gaze into my eyes with that practiced look of concern. It took every ounce of my willpower not to flinch away from her touch. I'm fine, I said. Just a bad dream. It's nothing. You're trembling, Liu Lian observed, her brow furrowed. Come, let's get you back to the quarters. I'll make you some tea. I could have laughed. She would make me tea. Tea laced with sleeping herbs, leaving me drowsy and pliable. In my past life, I had drunk it gratefully, thinking she was being kind. Now I knew that it was the first step in her plan. She wanted me out of the way so that she could meet with Chen Yun without my knowledge. But I was not the same girl I had been. I pulled my hands from hers and forced a smile. I'm fine, I repeated. Really, I think I just need some air. The rain has stopped and the garden is so peaceful at this hour. Liu Lian's eyes flickered, just briefly, just for an instant, with something that might have been suspicion. Then she smiled again, bright as a freshly polished mirror. Of course, whatever you need. I'll be in the quarters if you change your mind. I watched her walk away, and the rage that had burned so cold in my veins flickered into something warmer. She was so confident, so certain that she could manipulate me as easily as she always had. She had no idea that her puppet had cut its strings. I walked through the garden slowly, letting the chill evening air clear my head. The plum blossoms were in full bloom, their petals drifting down in soft pink drifts. This was my favorite spot in the palace, the only place where I had ever felt even a moment's peace. In my past life, I had come here to dream of Chen Yun. I had imagined him walking beside me, his hand in mine, whispering promises of a future together. Now I came here to remember. I sat down on the stone bench beneath the oldest plum tree, closed my eyes, and let the memories wash over me. Not the painful ones this time. I had no need to torture myself. the useful ones. The moments I had brushed past without noticing, the details that had seemed insignificant at the time. The servants in the southern kitchen who had gossiped about Chen Yun's debts, the guards who had whispered about his visits to the northern provinces, always returning with more money than his salary could explain, the merchants who had refused to do business with him, claiming he was not trustworthy. All of it had been there, right in front of me, and I had refused to see it. I would not make that mistake again. I stayed in the garden until the moon rose high overhead, painting the plum blossoms silver. Then I rose, brushed the petals from my uniform, and walked back to the servants' quarters with a plan already forming in my mind. I had 3 months before the forged letter would have been delivered to me. 3 months to plant the seeds of Chen Yun's destruction. 3 months to make sure that when he reached for the power he craved, he would find only ash. The days that followed were a blur of careful maneuvering. I rose before dawn each morning, performed my duties with flawless precision, and observed everything. Everyone. I memorized the patterns of the palace. Who spoke to whom, what secrets were whispered in the kitchens, which doors opened at which hours. I had been a servant for years in my past life, but I had never truly seen. Now I saw everything. The first thing I learned was that Chen Yun had already begun his work. He had been subtly poisoning the emperor's mind against the crown prince for months, seeding doubts that would eventually bloom into accusations of treason. He had allies everywhere, in the court, in the military, in the households of the nobility. But he also had enemies, men who resented his rapid rise, his arrogance, his willingness to trample anyone who stood in his way. In my past life, I had been too blinded by love to see them. Now I sought them out. It was not easy. A lowly palace maid could not simply walk up to a nobleman and offer her services. I had to be patient. I had to be subtle. I had to wait for the opportunities to present themselves. The first opportunity came in the form of Lady Zhao. Lady Zhao was the wife of General Zhao, one of the most powerful men in the military. She was also Chen Yun's cousin, and she hated him with a passion that burned bright and cold. In my past life, I had known nothing of their feud. It had been whispered about among the senior maids, but I had been too wrapped up in my own affairs to pay attention. Now I listened. I learned that Lady Zhao's father had been ruined by Chen Yun's machinations, his reputation destroyed, his estates confiscated. Lady Zhao had married General Zhao in part to rebuild her family's fortunes, but she had never forgiven her cousin. She was my way in. I began to observe Lady Zhao's habits. She visited the garden every afternoon, walking alone among the plum trees with a book of poetry in her hands. She was a woman of refined tastes, but she was also lonely. Her husband was often away on military campaigns, and the palace was not kind to women of her station. She had few friends and even fewer allies. One afternoon, I accidentally dropped a bundle of laundry in her path. The linens spilled across the stone walkway, and I fell to my knees, bowing and apologizing. "Forgive me, my lady. I am so clumsy. Please, I will clean this up immediately." Lady Zhao looked down at me with cool, assessing eyes. She was a beautiful woman with sharp features and a proud bearing. Her gaze was not unkind, but there was something calculating in it. "What is your name?" she asked. "Lin Wei, my lady. I am assigned to the Winter Palace." She nodded slowly. "You have a good face. Honest. Too honest, perhaps. That is a dangerous quality in a palace." I kept my head bowed. "I do not understand, my lady." She laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "No, of course you don't." She paused, and I could feel her gaze lingering on me. "You're new here, aren't you?" "I don't remember seeing you before." "I arrived 3 months ago, my lady." 3 months. And already you've been assigned to the Winter Palace. That's unusual for a new servant. Someone must have recommended you." I held my tongue. It was true that I had been granted a position in the Winter Palace, a position that put me in the path of the Empress Dowager and other high-ranking officials. But I had no idea why. In my past life, I had been given the assignment by Chen Yun himself, who had arranged it to place me close to the center of power. This time, I had simply woken up in the Winter Palace with no explanation and no memory of how I had come to be assigned there. Perhaps the universe had given me a second chance. Perhaps it had decided to even the scales. "I am fortunate, my lady," I said finally. Lady Zhao studied me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. "I like you," she said. "You have a quiet dignity that I admire. Come, walk with me." I gathered the spilled linens and followed her through the garden. She did not speak for a long time, and I did not press her. The silence between us was comfortable, companionable. "You know who I am," she said finally. "You must. Everyone in the palace knows who I am. Lady Zhao, my lady, the wife of General Zhao. And do you know who my cousin is?" I hesitated. This was the moment. I could lie, pretend I knew nothing, and risk losing her trust. Or I could tell the truth and risk everything. "Chen Yun," I said softly. "He is your cousin, my lady." Lady Zhao stopped walking. She turned to face me, and her expression was unreadable. "Interesting," she said. "Most servants pretend they don't know. They think it's safer to play ignorant. But you are not like most servants, are you?" I met her gaze. "No, my lady, I am not." She laughed again, and this time the sound was warmer. "Good. I need someone who is not afraid to speak the truth. Sit with me, Lin Wei. I have a story to tell you." We sat on the stone bench beneath the oldest plum tree, and Lady Zhao told me everything. The history of her family's fall, Chen Yun's treachery, the slow erosion of her father's reputation. She spoke with a quiet, controlled fury that made my blood run cold. "I know what he is planning," she said. "He thinks I'm blind, but I'm not. I know he's been meeting with the northern generals. I know he's been buying favors from the eunuchs. I know he's been whispering lies to the emperor about the crown prince. He thinks he can destroy me along with everyone else who stands in his way." I kept my expression neutral. "What do you intend to do about it, my lady?" "Nothing," she said bitterly. "I can do nothing. I am a woman. I have no power, no position, no authority. All I can do is watch while he tears everything apart." "You have more power than you think," I said quietly. She looked at me sharply. "Explain." I had to be careful. I could not reveal too much, could not let her know that I had already lived once before, but I could plant the seeds. "The servants," I said. "We see everything. We hear everything. We are invisible to people like Chen Yun, but we are everywhere. If you need information, you can find it. If you need a message delivered, we can deliver it. You just need to know who to trust." Lady Zhao studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. "You are not just honest," she said. "You are clever. That is a rare combination. Very well, Lin Wei. I will trust you. But if you betray me—" "I have no intention of betraying you, my lady," I said. "I want Chen Yun destroyed just as much as you do." She raised an eyebrow. "That is a strong statement." "He betrayed someone I loved," I said. "It was not a lie. I had loved myself once. I had loved the girl I had been before everything fell apart. I would not let her die in vain." Lady Zhao nodded slowly. "Then we have a common enemy. That is enough for now." We spoke for another hour, and by the end of our conversation, I had a list of names: allies, informants, men and women who had been wronged by Chen Yun and would be eager to see him fall. I memorized every detail, every name, every weakness that Lady Zhao described. When I finally left her, the sun was beginning to set, and I felt stronger than I had in weeks. I had an ally. I had a plan. I had time. 3 months. It was not much, but it was enough. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I worked during the day, performing my duties with the same quiet efficiency I had always shown, And at night, I moved through the palace like a ghost. I gathered information, delivered messages, forged connections. I was careful, so careful. No one suspected the quiet, unassuming maid from the Winter Palace was anything more than she appeared. I learned that Chen Yun was meeting with the northern generals in secret, planning a coup that would place him at the head of a new regime. He intended to depose the crown prince and install a puppet ruler who would be beholden to him. The emperor, already weakened by illness and age, was the perfect target for his manipulations. I also learned that Chen Yun was in debt. Deep, crippling debt. He had borrowed heavily from the merchants of the southern provinces, promising them favors and positions in exchange for their money. He had no intention of repaying them. He planned to have them executed once his coup was complete. I smiled when I heard that. Debt was a powerful weapon. If I could expose Chen Yun's financial machinations, I could ruin him without ever mentioning the treason he planned. The emperor might forgive many things, but he would not forgive a man who had drained the royal treasury to enrich himself. But I could not act alone. I needed allies, and I needed proof. The proof came in the form of a merchant named Wei Feng. Wei Feng was a silk trader, one of the wealthiest men in the southern provinces. He had lent Chen Yun a vast sum of money, believing that the nobleman's patronage would open doors for him in the capital. Instead, Chen Yun had taken his money and vanished, leaving Wei Feng with nothing but empty promises. I met him in the market district, disguised in a simple cotton robe, my hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He was a tall, angular man with shrewd eyes and a mouth that seemed perpetually on the verge of a smile. "Lin Wei," he said, bowing slightly. "Lady Zhao sent word that you would be coming. She speaks highly of you." "Lady Zhao is too kind," I said. "I have a proposition for you, Master Wei, one that I think will be of mutual benefit." He gestured for me to sit at his stall, and we spoke in low voices, obscured by the bolts of bright silk that hung around us. "You know what Chen Yun has done to me," he said. "You know he has ruined me, but do you know what else he has done? He has made promises to the other merchants of the South. He promised us all positions in his new government. He promised us protection from our rivals. He promised us everything, and he will deliver nothing. He is a liar and a thief." "He is worse than that," I said. "He is a traitor. He plans to depose the crown prince and seize power for himself." Wei Feng's eyes widened. "You have proof? I am gathering it, but I need your help. I need copies of the promissory notes he signed. I need records of his debts. I need anything that can prove he has been draining the treasury for his own purposes." Wei Feng was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I have been keeping copies of everything," he said. "I knew he would try to destroy the evidence eventually. I am not a fool, Lin Wei. I have been waiting for the right moment to act." "Then the moment has come," I said. We spent the next hour going over the details. Wei Feng gave me the copies of the promissory notes, as well as a list of the other merchants Chen Yun had swindled. He also gave me the name of a contact in the Ministry of Justice, a clerk who was loyal to the crown prince and would be willing to help. When I left the market district, my satchel was heavy with evidence, and my heart was light. The pieces were coming together, but I was not the only one making moves. One evening, I returned to the servants' quarters to find Liu Lian waiting for me. She was sitting on my bed, her expression one of barely concealed impatience. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I've been looking for you everywhere." "Out," I said vaguely. "I had some errands to run." Liu Lian's eyes narrowed. "Errands? What kind of errands?" I shrugged. "The same kind we all run. You know how it is." She did not look convinced. I could see her studying me, trying to figure out what had changed. I had not been the same since the nightmares began. I was quieter now, more self-contained. I did not confide in her the way I used to. "Lin Wei," she said, and her voice had a pleading note to it. "You know you can tell me anything. We're sisters. We've always been sisters." The word made my stomach turn. Sisters. Yes, we had been sisters, and she had sold me to the executioner. "I'm fine," I said. "Really? I've just been tired lately." The nightmares, Liu Lian repeated. "Tell me about them." I hesitated. This was dangerous. If I told her too much, she would report it to Chen Yun. But if I told her nothing, she would become suspicious. I had to find a balance. "I dream that someone is chasing me," I said carefully. "A man. I can never see his face, but I know he means to hurt me." Lilian's expression softened. "That sounds terrible." "It is," I said, "but it's just a dream. It doesn't mean anything." She reached out and took my hand. "You know I'm here for you," she said, "whenever you need me." I smiled and thanked her, and I let her believe that I was still the same gullible girl she had always known. But inside, I was cold. I knew what she was doing. She was trying to get close to me, to find out what I was planning. She would report everything to Chen Yun, and he would move against me before I could complete my work. I had to act fast. The next day, I made my move. I went to the Ministry of Justice with Wei Feng's contact and submitted a formal complaint against Chen Yun. The complaint detailed his debts, his embezzlement of funds from the royal treasury, and his dealings with the northern generals. It was a damning document, carefully worded to avoid any mention of treason. I did not want to overreach. I wanted to give the ministry evidence that was impossible to ignore. The complaint was received by the clerk, who promised to bring it to the attention of his superior. I left the ministry with my heart pounding, knowing that I had just set in motion a chain of events that could not be stopped, but I was not finished yet. I had one more piece of the puzzle to put in place. Chen Yun's plan to depose the crown prince was not just a political maneuver, it was personal. He had been in love with the Empress Dowager for years, and he believed that if he could seize power, he could finally have her. He had even gone so far as to write her letters, declaring his undying affection and his intention to make her his wife. In my past life, I had known nothing of these letters. They had been hidden away in the Empress Dowager's private chambers, and they had never come to light. But now, I knew where to find them. It was a risky plan. The Empress Dowager's chambers were heavily guarded, and any servant caught snooping would be executed without trial. But I had an advantage. I knew the palace's secrets. I knew the hidden passageways that the servants used to move about unseen. I knew the patterns of the guards, the times when the corridors were empty. I waited until the night of the emperor's birthday celebration. The palace was in chaos, servants running back and forth, musicians tuning their instruments, nobles arriving in their finest silks. It was the perfect cover. I slipped into the Empress Dowager's chambers through a servant's passage, moving as silently as a shadow. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn, the bed undisturbed. I went straight to the bureau where I knew the letters were hidden. And there they were. A stack of letters, bound with a silken ribbon, each one addressed to the Empress Dowager in Chen Yun's elegant hand. I read a few lines, enough to confirm my suspicions. He wrote of love, of power, of his dreams of making her his queen. It was treasonous, it was pathetic, it was perfect. I took the letters and replaced them with a stack of blank paper, carefully weighted to feel the same. Then I slipped back through the servant's passage and made my way to Lady Zhao's chambers. She was waiting for me, her expression tight with anxiety. "Did you get them?" she asked. I held up the letters. "All of them." She let out a long breath. "Good, good." She took the letters from me and scanned them quickly, her eyes widening. "This is more than I could have hoped for. He has signed his own death warrant." "Not yet," I said. We need to make sure they fall into the right hands." "I know," she said. "I have already made arrangements. Tomorrow morning, these letters will be delivered to the Crown Prince. He will know what to do with them." I nodded. "Then it's done." Lady Zhao looked at me with an expression that was equal parts admiration and wariness. "You are a very dangerous woman, Lin Wei." "I am a woman who has been wronged," I said. "There is a difference." She laughed. "Perhaps there is, but I am glad you are on my side." I smiled and left her chambers, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The trap was set. All that remained was to wait for it to spring. The days that followed were tense. I went about my duties as usual, but I was constantly watching, constantly listening. The palace was a hive of whispers, and I was in the center of it. The first sign that my plan was working came 3 days later. I was in the kitchens, helping to prepare the evening meal, when one of the senior maids rushed in, her face pale. "Have you heard?" she whispered. "The Crown Prince has arrested General Shu. He's been charged with conspiracy against the Emperor." General Shu was one of Chen Yun's most powerful allies. His arrest was a direct blow to the conspiracy. I kept my face neutral. "That's terrible news," I said. "I wonder what he did." The senior maid leaned closer. "They say he was plotting with Chen Yun to overthrow the Crown Prince. They say there's evidence, letters, promises, all of it. Chen Yun is going to be arrested any day now." I felt a thrill of triumph, but I did not let it show. "That can't be true," I said. "Chen Yun is a loyal servant of the Emperor." The senior maid shrugged. "That's what everyone thought. But the Crown Prince has proof. They say he's going to have Chen Yun executed for treason." The news spread like wildfire through the palace. Within hours, everyone knew that Chen Yun was a traitor. The nobles who had allied themselves with him began to distance themselves, scrambling to prove their loyalty to the Crown Prince. His supporters in the military were arrested one by one. His network of informants collapsed, and in the middle of it all, I watched. I watched Chen Yun's face when he was arrested in the Great Hall, his expression one of shock and disbelief. I watched him protest his innocence, claiming that the evidence against him was forged. I watched him be dragged away to the dungeons, still shouting that he was being framed. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. He had destroyed me in my past life. Now I was destroying him. But the story did not end there. A week after Chen Yun's arrest, the Crown Prince issued a decree. He had reviewed the evidence against the conspirators and found it overwhelming. Chen Yun and his allies were guilty of treason against the throne. They were to be executed at dawn. I was in the garden when I heard the news. I sat down on the stone bench beneath the oldest plum tree and let the relief wash over me. It was over. It was finally over. Or so I thought. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. It was the Crown Prince himself, dressed in simple robes, accompanied only by a single guard. I fell to my knees, my heart pounding. "Your Highness," I said, "forgive me. I was not expecting." "Rise," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I came here to thank you." I looked up, confused. "Thank me, Your Highness?" He nodded. "Lady Zhao told me everything. How you gathered the evidence against Chen Yun, how you risked your life to bring him to justice. Without you, I would be dead, and the Empire would be in chaos." I bowed my head. "I only did what was right, Your Highness. The right thing," he repeated. "That is a rare quality, Lin Wei. Too many people in this palace do what is convenient, or what is profitable, or what is safe. You did what was right. That is why I am here." He paused, and I felt his gaze on me. "I know who you are," he said. "I know about your family. I know about the circumstances that brought you to the palace. And I want you to know that I am grateful. I will not forget what you have done." I was stunned. In my past life, the Crown Prince had been a distant figure, someone I had never even spoken to. Now he was standing before me, thanking me for saving his life. "What will you do now?" I asked. He smiled. "I will rule, Lin Wei. I will rule the way my father should have ruled, with justice and compassion. And I will make sure that Chen Yun and his allies are punished for their crimes." He turned to leave, but then he paused. "There is one more thing," he said. "I understand that you were once a servant in the Winter Palace. That is no longer fitting for someone of your station. I have arranged for you to be given a new position, a position worthy of your talents." I was speechless. In my past life, I had died as a servant. I had died believing that I was worthless, that my life had no value, and now I was being offered a chance to rise. "Thank you, Your Highness," I said. "Thank you." He nodded and left the garden, leaving me alone beneath the plum tree. I sat there for a long time, staring up at the branches, feeling the cool evening breeze on my face. I had done it. I had saved myself. I had destroyed the man who had ruined me. And I had risen, but the story did not end there either. The months that followed were a blur of change. I was given a new position as a secretary in the Crown Prince's household, a role that allowed me to exercise the skills I had never had a chance to use in my past life. I wrote letters, managed affairs, and counseled the Crown Prince on matters of state. I was no longer a servant. I was someone of importance. And then the Crown Prince became the emperor. His father, the old emperor, had been ill for months, and his death was not unexpected. The new emperor was young, idealistic, and determined to root out the corruption that had plagued his father's reign. He appointed new officials, reformed the tax system, and restored the fortunes of the provinces. And he made me his chief advisor. It was a remarkable rise. I had gone from being a lowly palace maid to being one of the most powerful women in the empire, but I did not forget where I came from. I made sure that the servants of the palace were treated fairly, that their voices were heard, that their grievances were addressed. I was their advocate, and they loved me for it. But the greatest change came in my personal life. One evening, the emperor came to my chambers, his expression thoughtful. "Lin Wei," he said, "I have been thinking about something." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Your family," he said. "Your father was a scholar, was he not? A man of great learning and integrity?" "Yes, Your Majesty," I said. "He was." "And your mother was a noblewoman, a woman of high birth and fine breeding." "Yes, Your Majesty." He paused. "Then why are you still a secretary? Why are you not a noblewoman yourself?" I was taken aback. "Your Majesty, I am honored to serve you in any capacity." "I am not talking about your service," he said. "I am talking about your status. You deserve to be more than a secretary. You deserve to be a lady of the court." He smiled. "I am asking you to marry me, Lin Wei." I was speechless. The emperor, the most powerful man in the empire, was asking me to be his wife. It was the last thing I had expected, the last thing I had dared to hope for. "Your Majesty," I said, "I am not worthy. You are more worthy than anyone I know," he said. "You saved my life. You saved the empire. You are brave, clever, and kind. I have never met anyone like you." I looked at him, and I saw the sincerity in his eyes. He meant every word. "I will marry you," I said. "I will be your wife, and I will serve you faithfully for the rest of my days." He smiled and kissed my hand, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that I had not felt in years. I had been betrayed, humiliated, and executed in my past life. But now, in this new life, I had found love. I had found purpose. I had found happiness. The wedding was the grandest the empire had ever seen. Nobles from every province came to pay their respects, and the palace was decked in silk and flowers. I wore a gown of red and gold, the traditional colors of the bride, and I walked down the aisle with my head held high. Standing at the altar, I looked out at the crowd and saw familiar faces. Lady Zhao smiling through tears, Wei Feng, his sharp eyes bright with approval, the servants who had once been my peers, cheering and waving from the back of the hall. And Liulian, yes, Liulian was there. She had been stripped of her position and reduced to a lowly servant, but she had been allowed to attend the wedding as a gesture of my mercy. I had forgiven her. Not because she deserved it, but because I no longer had room in my heart for hate. She looked at me as I walked past, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. Regret, genuine, heart-wrenching regret. She knew that she had been wrong. She knew that she had lost everything, and she knew that she had no one to blame but herself. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I simply nodded at her, as one might nod at a stranger, and moved on. The Emperor took my hand, and we exchanged our vows. I promised to love him, honor him, and serve him for the rest of my life, and he promised the same. When the ceremony was over, we walked out of the hall together, and the crowd cheered. I was no longer Lin Wei, the foolish maid. I was the Empress, and I had risen from the ashes of my past to become something glorious. But the story did not end there either. Years passed. I gave birth to a son, a healthy boy with his father's sharp eyes and my stubborn determination. I raised him with love and care, teaching him the values I had learned in my long and difficult journey. I made sure he knew that power was a tool to be used wisely, not a prize to be won at any cost. The Emperor and I ruled together, side by side, for decades. We reformed the empire, brought peace to the provinces, and ensured that the people were treated fairly. I became known as the Wise Empress, a woman of great counsel and greater heart. And in my final years, I wrote a memoir. I wrote about my life as a maid, my betrayal, my death, and my rebirth. I wrote about the lessons I had learned, the mistakes I had made, and the redemption I had found. I hoped that my story would inspire others, especially young women, to believe that they were worthy of more than the world had given them. But I did not write about the rebirth. That secret I kept to myself. Some things were too strange to be believed, too precious to be shared. And so I lived and loved and ruled, and when I finally passed from this world, I did so with a smile on my lips and a heart full of peace. I had been a foolish maid, betrayed and broken. But I had risen, I had become glorious. And that, I thought, was the greatest victory of all. The rain had stopped, the plum blossoms were falling, and I was alive. For the first time in my memory, I was truly, completely alive. I sat beneath the plum tree for a long time, watching the petals drift down like soft pink snow. The garden was peaceful, the air cool and clean after the storm. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sounds of the palace coming back to life. Servants bustling about their duties, nobles returning to their chambers, the ever-present hum of activity that never truly ceased. But here, in this small corner of the world, there was silence. There was peace. There was the quiet assurance that everything was going to be all right. I had done it. I had changed my fate. I had taken the broken pieces of my past life and forged them into something new, something stronger. I was no longer the foolish maid who had trusted the wrong man. I was no longer the girl who had gone to her death, screaming for a love that was never real. I was Lin Wei. I was the Empress. I was a woman who had learned to fight for herself, and I was happy. I rose from the bench and walked back through the garden, my steps light and sure. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. It was beautiful, more beautiful than I remembered. I had spent so long focused on the darkness of my past that I had forgotten how to see the light. But now I saw it everywhere, in the warm glow of the sunset, in the laughter of the children playing in the courtyard, in the gentle smile of the Emperor when he looked at me. I had been given a second chance. I had taken it, and I had made the most of it. And now I was going to spend the rest of my life living it. I walked back to the palace, my heart full. The servants bowed as I passed, their faces bright with respect and affection. I smiled at them, nodded to them, and they smiled back. I was not just a noble wife. I was a symbol of hope. I was proof that no matter how dark the past, the future could be bright. And I would never forget that. The wedding had been 3 weeks ago, but the palace was still alive with celebration. The gardens were hung with silk lanterns, and the courtyards were filled with musicians and dancers. The nobles had come from every corner of the empire to pay their respects, and they had brought gifts: jade, silk, gold, and precious jewels. It was a display of wealth and power that would have made me dizzy in my past life. Now I accepted it with calm grace. I was no longer a girl who could be overwhelmed by the glitter of a pretty bauble. I had seen too much, known too much, survived too much to be easily impressed. But I was touched by the emperor's thoughtfulness. He had arranged for my family. What remained of them? To attend the wedding. My father, who had been a scholar of modest means, had been given a position in the Imperial Academy. My mother, who had died when I was young, had been honored with a memorial garden in the palace grounds. And my brothers, who had been scattered across the provinces, had been brought to the capital and given posts that suited their talents. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. The emperor had not just married me. He had embraced me completely, including the family that had shaped me. And I would never forget that either. The months passed, and I settled into my new role as empress. It was a demanding position, filled with endless duties and responsibilities, but I found that I loved it. I loved meeting with the nobles, listening to their concerns, finding ways to resolve their disputes. I loved working with the emperor on matters of state, helping him craft policies that would benefit the people. I loved walking through the palace, seeing the faces of the servants who had once been my peers, knowing that I had the power to make their lives better. I also loved the quiet moments, the moments when the emperor and I sat together in the garden, watching the moon rise over the plum trees. The moments when we talked about nothing and everything, when he told me about his childhood and I told him about mine. The moments when we simply existed, content in each other's company. In my past life, I had dreamed of love. I had longed for it, craved it, believed in it with all my heart, and I had been betrayed. But now I had found it, real love. Not the desperate, grasping obsession I had felt for Chen Yun, but something deeper, something stronger, something that could weather any storm. I was grateful for every day that I had with the emperor. I was grateful for the son we had together, a bright-eyed boy who filled the palace with laughter and joy. I was grateful for the life I had built from the ashes of my past, and I was grateful for the lessons I had learned. The hard lessons, the painful lessons, the lessons that had made me who I was. I had been a foolish maid, betrayed and broken, but I had risen. I had become glorious, and I would never let anyone take that away from me again. I sat in my chambers one evening, reviewing reports from the provinces, when there was a knock at the door. A servant entered, bowing low. "Your Majesty, there is someone here to see you. A woman. She says she knew you when you were a maid." I looked up, surprised. The servants had been told to screen my visitors carefully. Not everyone had the right to demand an audience with the Empress, but this visitor had made it past the guards, which meant she was either very important or very persistent. "Who is she?" I asked. "She says her name is Liu Lian, Your Majesty." I felt a cold stillness settle over me. Liu Lian, the girl who had been my best friend, the girl who had betrayed me to Chen Yun, the girl who had watched me go to my death without lifting a finger to help. I had not seen her since the wedding, and I had not thought about her in months. The anger I had once felt toward her had faded, replaced by a quiet indifference. She was no longer important to me. She was no longer anything to me, but still, she had come, and I had to know why. "Show her in," I said. The servant bowed and left. A few moments later, Liu Lian entered the chamber. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders hunched, her eyes downcast. She was dressed in simple robes, the clothes of a lowly servant, and her face was pale and thin. She fell to her knees before me. "Your Majesty," she said, "thank you for seeing me." I studied her for a long moment. She looked nothing like the confident, scheming girl I had once known. She looked broken, humble, defeated. "Why are you here?" I asked. My voice was cold, but not unkind. Liu Lian raised her head, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I came to apologize," she said. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I have done terrible things. But I wanted you to know that I am sorry." I did not speak. I simply waited, letting her continue. "I was jealous of you," she said, her voice trembling. "You were always so kind, so good. Everyone loved you. And I wanted to be like you, but I was weak. When Chen Yun came to me and offered me a way to rise, I took it. I didn't think about what it would do to you. I didn't think about anything except myself." She paused, wiping her tears. "I have regretted it every day since. I have lived with the guilt, knowing that I betrayed the only true friend I ever had. And I know that I can never undo what I did. But I wanted you to know that I am truly sorry. I wanted you to know that I have changed." I looked at her and I felt something shift inside me. It was not forgiveness. Not exactly. It was more like release. Like letting go of a weight I had been carrying for too long. "Liu Lian," I said, "I have thought about you many times over the years. I have wondered what I would say to you if I ever saw you again. And I thought I would be angry. I thought I would hate you. But I don't." She looked up, surprised. "I don't hate you," I repeated. "I don't even pity you. I have moved on. I have found peace. And I hope that you can find it too." She began to cry in earnest, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." I stood and walked toward her. I did not embrace her. I was not ready for that. But I did something I had not expected to do. I offered her my hand. "Rise," I said, "and try to do better. That is all any of us can do." She took my hand, her grip trembling, and rose to her feet. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and gratitude that I had never seen on her face before. "I will," she said. "I promise." I nodded and watched her leave, and then I sat down and looked out the window at the plum trees, their blossoms falling softly in the evening light. The past was done, the future was waiting, and I was ready for it. I continued my journey with the Emperor, navigating the complexities of court life with steady determination. But there were moments when the weight of memory pressed upon me. I would be walking through the corridors, and a shadow would fall just so, and I would feel a sudden pang of something, not quite fear, not quite sorrow, a ghost of the emotions I had felt in my past life. I had learned, however, to let those moments pass, to breathe through them, to release them like the petals of the plum blossoms, drifting away on the wind. The Emperor noticed, sometimes, that I would grow quiet. He would ask me what was wrong, and I would smile and tell him nothing. How could I explain? I could not tell him that I had lived before, that I had died, that I had been reborn into this life with the memories of my own execution haunting my dreams. He would think I was mad, and perhaps I was, a little, but I had found a way to make that madness work for me. One evening, a few years into our marriage, we were sitting in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The Emperor was reading a report, his brow furrowed. I was watching the plum blossoms drift down around us. He looked up suddenly. "Lin Wei," he said, "you've been quiet again." I smiled. "I was thinking. About what?" I hesitated. Then, for the first time, I considered telling him the truth. The whole truth. Not about the rebirth. I could not bring myself to share that secret, but about the fear. The fear that had been with me my entire life, the fear that I would lose everything I had built, the fear that I would wake up one morning and find myself back in that cell, back on that executioner's block, back at the moment of my death. Sometimes I worry, I said slowly. I worry that I will lose you, that I will lose our son, that I will lose everything. He put down his report and took my hand. You won't, he said. I promise you. I will never let anyone hurt you. I believed him. I had to believe him, but I also knew that life was unpredictable. I had learned that lesson more painfully than anyone, and so I held his hand and I let the fear wash over me and through me, and I let it go. I was not the same girl I had been. I was stronger now. I was smarter. I was ready for whatever the future might bring, and I had the Emperor by my side. That, I knew, would make all the difference. The seasons turned and the years passed. The plum blossoms bloomed and fell again. I watched my son grow from a squalling infant into a tall, handsome young man. I watched the Emperor grow grayer and wiser. I watched the Empire change and grow under our guidance. I had spent so much of my past life focused on the wrong things. Love, ambition, revenge. But now I had found something better. Purpose. I was not just a wife or a mother or an empress. I was someone who made a difference. Someone who mattered. And that was enough. I still remembered my past life, of course. I would never forget it. But the memories no longer haunted me. They were a part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was. The pain of Chen Yun's betrayal, the horror of my execution, they had shaped me, made me stronger, sharper. They had made me the woman I was today. I would never let myself be that foolish maid again. I would never let myself be used. But I would also never let myself be consumed by bitterness. I had made my peace with the past. I had moved on. And now, as I sat in the garden with the Emperor, watching the plum blossoms drift down around us, I felt a sense of contentment I had never thought possible. I had risen. I had become glorious. And the best part was that I was still rising. One of my proudest achievements during those years was the school for servant girls. The idea came to me one afternoon when I saw a young maid, no more than 14, drop a tray of tea and burst into tears. She was so afraid, so convinced that she would be beaten or dismissed for her clumsiness. I saw myself in her. The girl I had been, before everything. The girl who had believed she was worthless. I approached her and knelt down, helping her gather the scattered cups. Don't worry, I said. Accidents happen. I will see that you are not punished. She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. Your Majesty, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I know, I said. It's all right. I walked away from her with a heavy heart. I knew that I could intervene in her case, but there were thousands of girls like her in the palace, and I could not save them all. But perhaps I could do something to help. Perhaps I could give them the one thing I had never had, hope. The school was born from that moment. I established a place where servant girls could learn to read and write, to do sums, to understand the world beyond the palace walls. I hired tutors and organized lessons. I made it clear that attendance was not mandatory, but it was encouraged, and those who excelled would be given opportunities to advance. It was not a popular move. Many of the nobles thought I was wasting my time. They believed that servants should be kept ignorant, that education would give them ideas above their station. But I did not care. I had been a servant. I knew what it was like to be trapped in a world that saw you as nothing, and I was determined to change that. Over time, the school grew. More and more girls attended, drawn by the promise of a better life. They learned to read and write, to speak with confidence, to navigate the complexities of palace life. Many of them went on to become administrators, secretaries, and even minor officials. They broke the cycle of poverty and oppression that had held them back. I was proud of what I had built. It was a small thing, perhaps, in the grand scheme of the empire. But it was mine. It was a legacy I could leave behind. The emperor was proud of me, too. "You have a kind heart," he told me one evening. "You always have. That is what I love most about you." I smiled and leaned into his embrace. "I learned it from you," I said. "You showed me that it is possible to be powerful and kind. That is a lesson I will never forget." I had always tried to hold my head high, to be a worthy empress for my people. But there were some things that brought me low, as they do any woman who has known loss. The death of my father, when it came, was a blow I had not expected. He had been old, and he had been ill for some time, but I had not truly believed that he would leave me. When the messenger arrived with the news, I felt as though the ground had opened up beneath me. He had been my anchor, my guide, the one who had taught me the value of learning and truth. In my past life, I had lost him to illness before I even entered the palace. In this life, I had been given more time. I had been able to see him honored, to watch him take pride in my success. I had been able to say goodbye, and yet the grief was still sharp. It still cut deep. I went to his funeral and wept as I had not wept in years. The emperor stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, silent and supportive. My son stood behind me, his face solemn, his eyes full of questions he did not dare ask. When the ceremony was over, I walked alone through the gardens, trying to make sense of my emotions. I had known so much loss in my past life. I had thought I was immune to it. But grief did not work that way. It found you, always, no matter how prepared you thought you were. I sat on the stone bench beneath the oldest plum tree and closed my eyes. I thought about my father. I thought about the mother I had never really known. I thought about the family I had lost and the family I had gained, and I let myself grieve. It was all right to grieve. It was all right to feel sad. I did not have to be strong all the time. I did not have to be the perfect empress. I could just be a daughter, mourning the loss of her father. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was setting. The garden was quiet, and I was alone. But I was not lonely. I had the emperor. I had my son. I had a life that was richer and fuller than I had ever imagined. I rose from the bench and walked back to the palace, my step steady, my heart calm. I would carry my father's memory with me always, and I would honor him by being the best empress I could be. Years later, when I was old and gray, I sat in the garden and watched the plum blossoms fall. My son was a man now, married to a woman he loved, with children of his own. The emperor was still by my side, his hand in mine, his eyes full of the same love I had first seen in them all those years ago. The empire was at peace. The people were prosperous, and I was content. I thought about my past life, the girl I had been, the pain I had endured, the betrayal I had survived. I thought about the choices I had made, the risks I had taken, the battles I had won. I thought about the person I had become. I had been a foolish maid, betrayed and broken, but I had risen. I had become glorious, and I would never forget that. The sun was warm on my face, and the plum blossoms were falling gently around me. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, savoring the moment. It was good, this life. It was good to be alive. In the quiet of those later years, I found myself reflecting on the nature of the second chance I had been given. Not in a philosophical way. I was never one for such abstractions, but in a practical one. What had I done with it? How had I justified the extraordinary luck of being reborn? The answer came to me slowly, in fragments. I had not squandered it. That was the important thing. I had used my knowledge and my strength to make a better world. I had punished the wicked and protected the innocent. I had loved fiercely and ruled wisely. I had become a mother, a wife, and a leader, but I had also made mistakes. Of course I had. I was only human. One of my greatest regrets was the way I had treated Liu Lian. I had forgiven her, but I had never truly let her back into my life. I had given her a second chance, but I had kept her at arm's length. I had been too proud, too guarded, too afraid to trust again. I wondered sometimes how different things might have been if I had let her in, if I had allowed myself to be vulnerable with her, if I had given her the chance to prove that she had changed. But it was too late now. She had passed away years ago, and I would never know what might have been. Another regret was the way I had handled my past. I had kept the secret of my rebirth locked away, never sharing it with anyone. Not even the Emperor, who knew me better than anyone. I had been afraid that he would think I was mad, or that he would see me as a ghost, or that he would not love me the same way. But now, in my old age, I wondered if I had been too cautious. Maybe sharing the truth would have brought us closer. Maybe he would have understood. Maybe he would have loved me even more. But I would never know. And I had made peace with that. I had so much to be grateful for. The Emperor had given me everything: love, security, purpose. My son had given me joy and pride. The people had given me their trust and respect. I was surrounded by kindness and support, and I had never been alone. That was worth more than all the gold in the empire. I spent my final days in the garden, surrounded by the plum blossoms. They bloomed every spring, their petals drifting down in soft pink showers. I had always loved them. From the very first moment I had seen them in my past life, they were a symbol of hope, of renewal, of the beauty that could emerge from the darkest of times. I thought about death, too. I was not afraid of it, not anymore. I had died once before, and it had not been the end. It had been a beginning. I did not know if I would be reborn again. I did not know what came after this life. But I had faith that it was something good, something beautiful, something worth waiting for. And when I closed my eyes for the last time, I was not sad. I was not afraid. I was just grateful. Grateful for the life I had been given, the second chance I had been offered, the love I had been blessed to find. I had been a foolish maid, betrayed and broken. But I had risen. I had become glorious, and I had done it all on my own terms. The plum blossoms were falling gently around me as the Emperor held my hand. My son and his family stood behind him, their faces etched with grief. The sky was clear and blue, and the birds were singing. I smiled and I let go. It had been a good life, a glorious life, and I would not have traded it for anything.